Erev Tov, good evening. We are continuing in the Rambam's Mishneh Torah on page Lamed Chet in the introduction. Tonight's Shiur is dedicated for the Refuah Shlema of Dr. Arthur Platt, Chaim Ozer B'neah, as well as for the Refuah Shlema. Devar Meir, help me out with the Hebrew name.
Yisrael Yosef Chaim Ben Meir.
Yisrael Yosef Chaim Ben Leah. And also for another Refuah Shlema, somebody who prefers not to be named, but I have her in mind here tonight. She should have a Refuah Shlema B'ezrat Hashem, along with all the other Cholei Israel. Tonight's shiur is a difficult shiur to teach, from my perspective. What I mean by a difficult shiur to teach from my perspective, I mean that it is no secret that I have tremendous love in my heart for and am deeply involved in the world of Giur and Gerim, conversion to Judaism and those who convert to Judaism righteously. For me, someone who converts to Judaism is a hero. Forget a first-class citizen. A hero, mamash a hero. For sure not a second or third-class citizen. For me, when I look at a Jewish world and I see dozens and dozens and dozens of people everywhere, I'm saying dozens because I'm referring to individuals that you might know, who do everything they can to turn their back on Judaism and walk out the door. There are that many more people who turn their back on everything that these people are running to and fulfill the words that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avraham Avinu. Lech lecha, go for yourself, go. Leave your home, leave your family, leave the land that you know, and go to where I will show you. And if I have any hope for figuring out not why Jews run away, but why do people run to Judaism? What do they find in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in Torah Israel? It is going to be from those people who faced all odds and became a shining example of what is a person who gives themselves the gift of not being born into Judaism, not being raised Jewish. Those who made that journey, like our forefather Avraham Avinu, in their own life, in their own time, in this world, and then just persevered, but thrived, and gave us the gift of being Gere HaTzedek. In my tefillah, in my amidah, I don't know about the rest of the Jewish people, but in my amidah, we have a prayer in which we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for something very special. Al HaTzadikim v'al HaChasidim v'al sherit Amecha Bet Yisrael v'al ziknehem v'al pletat bet sofrehem v'al Gere HaTzedek v'alenu yemun ha'achamecha Adonai Elohenu. Adonai, our God, please arouse your compassion upon the righteous, upon the pious, upon the remnants of your nation, the house of Israel, upon the elders, upon the remaining scholars of the Torah academies, upon the righteous converts, and upon us. Somebody who converts to Judaism is in the category of tzaddikim, of chasidim, of zekenim, al pilatat bet sofrehem, the last of the few who still have burning in them the love of Torah. I pray this every day. Ve'alenu, only I come at the end of the list. Alenu, also, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, don't forget me. Yonatan Halevi also wants to be included in this list of people. So I pray that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should place my portion with everyone in this list. Unfortunately, I have seen the Jewish world around me, and I have seen the mistreatment of Gerim. Mistreatment is such a nice word for the evil that is done in the name of Judaism to people who gave up everything in their life to come to Torah Hashem. It's not mistreatment. Mistreatment is too light of a word. And so I struggle with what I'm about to share. Because the topic evokes emotion in everyone who hears it. What is the purpose of the Rambam mentioning to us on page 38 Shemayah and Avtalyon, Gere HaTzedek. That Shemayah and Avtalyon were righteous converts to Judaism. Uvedinam, them and their Beit Hadin, Kiblum Yehuda v'Shimon uvedinam. They received from Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai and Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach the Torah. And I can't answer for you why the Jewish world looks the way it does. I have theories. You know, when your only claim to Judaism is not because you keep Shabbat or you eat kasher or you believe in Hashem, you're a good person. Your only claim to Judaism is because you were born that way. That's the only thing that made you Jewish is because your mother was Jewish. When you see somebody else who does all the things that you don't do right, but wasn't born like you, you have a very difficult time to accept. How could this person be more Jewish than I? Well, I'll tell you the answer, is that they're actually Jewish. That's what the difference is. You, I'm not sure about. You see, the problem that we're struggling with here is that Shemayah and Avtalyon are the link in the chain of oral transmission. And yet they are Gere HaTzedek. They are righteous converts. Gere HaTzedek, meaning that they were not born into Am Yisrael. Yet they are the people. It's one generation where the only leaders of Am Yisrael are Gere HaTzedek, righteous converts. What is happening here? And more importantly, not just what is happening here, what is the halachic permissibility of Gere HaTzedek serving in both the office of Nasi and the office of the Av Beit Hadin? All right. So now, you might be asking yourself a question, so what's the problem? What is the problem of Gere HaTzedek being a Nasi or a Av Beit Hadin? I wish that everyone here, and those of you in the Beit Knesset, you were here. But 2 years ago, when Rabbi Yosef Zarnighian was here in the Beit Knesset, he gave us a very interesting shiur on whether or not a Gere HaTzedek can hold the official office of Navi, of prophet. When we had a Beit Mikdash in Yerushalayim, you have to be very careful. The question is not if a Gere HaTzedek can prophesy. Everyone can prophesy, especially if one is Jewish. Very good. Everybody can receive prophecy. That's not the question. The question here is, can a Gere HaTzedek hold the office of Navi? Now, what's the problem with a Gere HaTzedek holding the office of Nasi? There may be a few issues, but this is not a racial issue. Nobody here is a racist. Am Yisrael allows for people to become Jewish. We're not racists. Let's say very, very easily the first step here. In the United States of America, we have a law that only someone born in the United States can be president of the United States. Everybody can become an American citizen, but only someone born in this country can hold office of president. What if his parents were born outside of the country, but he was born here? Can he hold office of the president?
Yes.
I think so. Yeah. Why? Why are we so adamant that a person should be born here to be the president? What's the reason for that law?
Turn around and go back.
Listen, we're going to appoint someone now to the highest position of leadership in this country. We want to make sure there are no dual loyalties here. He was born here, so maybe not. To lead this country, you have to be born in this country. And nobody screams, racist, that's evil. Because we're not understanding Torah law as religious law, but as a national law. In order to appoint someone in position of authority like a Navi, what is a Navi? A Navi decides with the king, with the head of the Sanhedrin. With the Kohen Gadol, do we go to war? Do we not go to war? What do we do in the government? What do we not do in the government? Taxation. A Navi has to be a person whose only interest is the interest of Am Yisrael. This is not a racist comment. Everyone can be a Navi. But in order to hold the official office of Navi, there's an official government position of Navi, it has to be someone who was born in Am Yisrael. This is the second reason. The second reason has to do with another halakha. of not appointing Gerim to a position of Serara. What is Serara?
Leadership.
A position of authority, of leadership. In halakha, there are a number of people who cannot be appointed to such a position. And the logic there is also reasonable. It's not perfect, but it's reasonable. Does anyone remember what Rabbi Yosef told us then?
It had to do with the inability of the nation to accept authority from that specific figure.
Very good. Do you remember not so long ago they were debating in our history here, who do we appoint to replace Rabban Gamliel in the Sanhedrin? If it's this one, Rabbi Akiva couldn't, he's a child of Gerim. This one couldn't, he didn't have enough money. This one couldn't because, remember this conversation we had? What are we worried about? In order to be an effective leader, we have to ensure that people are going to listen to you. And if you come from a population where someone will say, I don't want to listen to somebody who wasn't born Jewish. Who do you think you are to tell me? It's a blemish on the nation of Israel that they think that way. But because they think that way, there's a halakha in play. Protecting the leadership. We need to have a leader that everyone will listen to, that will not have excuses to throw in their face. By the way, what happens then if the nation of Israel reaches a place where they realize that this attitude is false and it's mistaken? And of course we want a Navi like that. What will Rabbi Yosef tell us? Of course. Of course we can appoint someone like that. By the way, the same halakha applies to positions of Serara. I'm afraid to say this on camera, I'm not going to lie to you. Positions of Serara regarding men and women. Chacham Benzion, Meir, Uziel dealt with these issues already before the founding of the state of Israel. Is it okay in halakha to have a prime minister who is a woman, a mayor who is a woman, a head of the city council who is a woman? But they didn't ask Chacham Benzion, Meir, Uziel about her. The question is, as a religious Jew, do I want such a thing? What about a Supreme Court justice? Does halakha not allow women to sit on a Supreme Court? These are fantastic questions, and I cannot simplify the answer, but Chacham Uziel's answer is very simple. If the Kehillah accepts upon themselves the leadership of such a person, then that's the only problem. Once they accept her as their leader, there's no problem anymore of Salah. They want her to be the mayor. That's why they voted for her. They want her to be the prime minister. So they voted for her.
So then it sets a precedent for future occurrences.
In a positive way.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. It does set a precedent. What happens? What's the big deal? There, how Uziel wrote, do you know how many stupid men I've seen in my life? How many wise women I've seen in my life? This is something, you live in a world where things change. Halakha doesn't change, but the reality to which halakha applies changes. And our Torah is not so rigid that it breaks. And this is exactly what happens here in this generation.
The difference between principle and law. Principle is flexible because it's something that's basically ingrained in the way the universe is designed by the Creator. And that allows it to be flexibly applied to situations without compromising the original principle. Whereas if you have a rigid law in the modern sense, when things change, you can't adapt to the change.
I 100%, exactly. So,
That's a mistake people make about halakha. They think it's like a rule that can't be broken, like you can't hang your bathing suit out to dry on a rack outside. But
when your nose is so close to the book, you can't read anymore what the book is saying? You have a whole Am Yisrael who lives like that with halakha. So here you have a generation, Shemayah and Avtalyon. The generation of Am Yisrael is being led not just by two Chachamim, but two Chachamim who were not born Jewish. Now you should know, this is going to be a point of contention among later sages. The reason being, how could it be that we have two Chachamim who are not born Jewish, who are holding office in the Jewish people at a time where halakha doesn't allow for such a thing? So let's see what Rav Kapach writes here at the bottom of the page. I'm going to explore with you also Rabbi Yosef Masas's answer. Page Lamed Chet. We're still at the last section of Lamed Chet. You know what? Let's not do this yet. Let's look at Rabbi Yosef Masas. I sent you a PDF. The PDF has on it, the front page says Nachalat Avot. It says Shemayah and Avtalyon.
I ask a stupid question.
Nothing is a stupid question.
If somebody becomes Jewish, they go through the whole process, they go in the mikvah, they get a Jewish soul, they're Jewish. Why does it matter what they did 10 years ago? Why does it matter where they're from? They are today a Jewish person, part of the Jewish people.
Nobody said they're not Jewish. And by the way, positions of authority in Am Yisrael today, rabbis of communities, principals of schools, are all held by rabbis who were born maybe non-Jewish once upon a time. When we're dealing with issues of national security, like holding office in a Jewish government in the nation of Israel, so this is not something that is so foreign to us. We have the same law in this country as well. And this isn't offensive. If they told me in Israel that because I'm an American-born Jew, I couldn't hold the office of prime minister in Israel, but it's not the law. But let's say that was the law. I wouldn't kick and scream that I'm upset about that. I understand. I do have a place for America in my heart. And that's something you should concern yourself with if I was in the position to run for prime minister. But this is something that is palatable and acceptable even in the regular world as a law that exists in many, 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 many civilized countries.
It's a secular law. It has not really.
I wouldn't call it secular. I would call it a national law. It's not a religious law. It's a national law.
Okay.
Yep. Well, there are some sources there, but that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for a source that talks about, it says Shemayah and Avtalyon. It's a PDF attached. Yep. So there's a PDF attached to your Zoom invitation. Nachalat Avot, so you're on page 2 of your PDF. Yeah, click on that PDF. And it's page 2 of that PDF. Do you see it? The Gemara says, yeah, page 2. I'm not reading there now. I'm going to read from the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis tell us, Naaman ger toshav haya, meaning he didn't convert entirely to Judaism, but he accepted upon himself to be a ger toshav. Nebuzradan ger tzedek haya. Remember, Nebuzradan, he was a ger tzedek. He was a righteous convert. Meaning he had a brit milah, he went to the mikveh, he accepted upon himself mitzvot. And then it says in the Gemara, in Masechet Sanhedrin, Mibnei banav shel Sisra, from the grandchildren of Sisra. I think I attached this to your Zoom invitation also. It should be a reference to Sanhedrin, page 96b, but it could be it's not there. Limdu Torah b'Yerushalayim. From the great-grandchildren or the grandchildren of Sisra, they taught Torah in Jerusalem. Mibnei banav shel Sancheriv. Limdu Torah barabim. The grandchildren of Sancheriv. You know Sancheriv? The king of Assyria. They taught Torah in public. Uma ninhun, who are they? Shemayah and Avtalyon. Shemayah and Avtalyon are descendants of Sancheriv. Mibnei banav shel Haman limdu Torah b'Bnei Brak. And the grandchildren of Haman taught Torah in Bnei Brak. So in Am Yisrael, you have leaders, Torah leaders, grandchildren of Haman, grandchildren of Sancheriv. And who are the grandchildren of Sancheriv? Shemayah and Avtalyon. So you want to now know which Gerim are they from? Who do they come? Their grandfather, great-grandfather, however that works, was Sancheriv. And they are the link in our oral transmission of Torah. So now, this is where Rabbi Yosef Masas picks this up on page 257 at the top of the page, like 257. But for those of you who have your cameras on, I really appreciate it. In the middle of 257, and one he wrote, Mibnei banav shel Sancheriv limdu Torah barabim, that from the grandchildren of Sancheriv, they taught Torah publicly. Umanin, who are they? Shemayah and Avtalyon. V'kashya li tuva. Says Rabbi Yosef Kapach, this is a very difficult thing for me. Sharei amur rabotenu zal. Our rabbis in Masechet Kiddushin, on page Ayin Vav Amud Bet 76b, they say, Shom tasim alecha melech sheyivchar Adonai Elohecha bo mikerev achicha tasim alecha melech. That you must surely place a king on you from among your brothers. Says the Gemara. What does it mean? Kol mesimot she'ata mesim lo yu ela mikerev achicha. All of the positions of authority that you fill in the Jewish government have to be from those who are your brothers. And then brothers, meaning those who are born from Jewish mothers. Shemayah and Avtalyon bnei Gerim. And how did they appoint Shemayah and Avtalyon, who are descendants of Gerim, echad nasi v'echad av bedin? V'av shenuchal lomar, maybe you'll say, shaita imam Yisrael, that their mother was from the Jewish people. So they're only grandchildren of Gerim. They're descendants of Gerim. Dimikerev achicha karinan ben. Therefore, they can be considered from among your brothers. K'mo shekatuv sham b'shas, like it's written there. Mikol makom, hatenach legabe Avtalyon she'arak av betadin. That's okay regarding Avtalyon, who was the head of the bedin. Omnam legabe Shemayah she'en nasi. Regarding Shemayah, who was the prince, harei hu chashuv kemelech. The prince is like a king. She'en ma'amidim melech ela mina mesi'in lekehuna. You're only allowed to appoint a king from someone who is able to marry the Kohanim. K'mo shekatuv b'tosefet Sanhedrin. And therefore, it appears nirad de melech adif minasi, that really there are more stringent requirements to becoming a king than there are to being a prince. ושוב ראיתי לרשב"ץ, זכותו יגן עלינו בספר מגן אבות על אבות, שנתעורר בזה, ותירץ כיוון שלא היה בישראל כמוהו בקבלה. The Rashbats in his commentary in Pirkei Avot, he tells us that because there were no other Chachamim in Kabbalah. What do I mean Kabbalah? In oral transmission, meaning these were the greatest Chachamim of the Talmudic scholars in their time. Hu haya ra'ui liot yoter mikulam nasi. He was fitting more than anyone else to be the nasi. Ki lo pasla Torah gerim el kshesh kayotze behem b'Yisrael. Because the Torah only suggests not taking gerim when you have an option to take someone else. But if the gerim outdid the Jewish people, and this is what happened in this generation, then surely the preference is to them. They take precedence. והביא ראיה משלב בפסחים שאמר הלל לבני ביתרה שהיו נשיאים מי גרם לכם מצות שהייתה בכם שלא שימשתם בית גדולי הדור שומע ואבטליון. We're going to discuss the story about Hillel later, but if you remember, there was a famous halakha that Hillel knew the answer to and no other chacham knew the answer to. And when they asked him, Hillel, how did you know the answer to this halakha? He said, because you thought you were too good to study from Gerim. I didn't. I went to study from Shemayah and Avtalyon. And that's why I know Torah better than you. Because I went to study from them. Mashma shehem levadam hem shayu gedolei hador. Says Rabbi Yosef Kapach from that story, you see that they were the leaders of the generation. Not leaders of the generation, some leaders of the generation. They were the leaders of the generation. So by the way, anybody who has an issue with Gerim, or anybody who doesn't like Gerim, or anybody who won't marry Gerim, or anybody who doesn't want Gerim in their community, or doesn't count Gerim for a Minyan, what they should do is take the Torah and throw it in the trash, because all of the Torah that they have today comes from Shemayah and Avtalyon. And if you can't trust them for a Minyan, you better not trust them for how to interpret the Word of God. You know how many Jewish communities don't count Gerim for a Minyan?
Are you joking?
No, of course. Zev, I'm surprised that you're surprised.
So this name Shemayah and Hillel that
That's Hillel and Shemayah. The famous ones are students of Shemayah and Avtalyon.
Shemayah.
Shemayah and Shammai are two different people. One is a rabbi, one is a student. Very good. Zev, I'll answer your question when I'm not being filmed. So while we're on Zoom, but after we're done being filmed. So here Rabbi Yosef Kapach gives the first answer. How could it be that there were Gerim that were leading the Jewish people? Two answers. You can either say their mother was Jewish and they were just descendants of Gerim, or you can say that even though they were Gerim themselves, they were the most competent Torah scholars of their generation. And because of that, they were worthy of this position. Now, that's Rabbi Yosef Kapach. But I brought you here to study the notes of Rav Kapach on the Mishneh Torah, and that brings you back to your book of Rav Kapach, page Lamed Chet. Look at the last footnote in the bottom left column of Lamed Chet. Kapach does something unusual. וכן כתב רבנו בעדויות, פרק א', משנה ג'. רבנו הרמב"ם writes in Mishnah, עדויות, in the first chapter, in the third Mishnah. וכן משמע בגיטין ובסנהדרין. Meaning, the opinion of the Rambam is not that Shemayah and Avtalyon are descendants of Gerim. He doesn't call them descendants of Gerim. What does he call them? What does the Rambam say at the top of the page? Gere HaTzedek, that they are righteous converts. I mean, he doesn't accept that they're descendants of converts. That Shemayah and Avtalyon are Gerim themselves. And he's consistent with this in his commentary on the Mishnah, in Eduyot. Let me show you that source. Let's see two sources. In your PDF, continue scrolling. You should have two photocopies from the Mishnah, Masechet Eduyot. It should say, there's no Roman numbers, no English numbers. Okay, Kuf Pei Tet, it should say at the bottom of the page. So scroll past the page 257, scroll past the one that says Mishnah, and the next page after that. It should be maybe page 5 or 4. Yeah, you see that? What number in your PDF is that?
That's number 4.
Page 4 in your PDF. Look at Halacha Gimel at the top of the page. Hillel Omer. Now this is, I'm going to read it now like the Rambam, not like the other commentaries, okay? Hillel Omer, Melahin Maim Shovin Poslin et Mikveh. That Maim Pesulin, Maim Shovim, what are Maim Shovim? When you want to fill up a mikveh, what kind of water do you need? It has to be natural water. So what is Maim She'uvin? Who knows the laws of mikveh? Okay, Sha'uv means drawn. Waters that are drawn. So you can take rainwater. Once you put it in a bucket and you move it somewhere, that water is already not natural water anymore. Correct. So this Maim She'uvin, Poslin et mikveh. They make the mikveh invalid. And they want to know why he mispronounces. According to the Rambam, it seems the word milah. According to others, the word hin should have been en. And the Mishnah explains why does Hillel mispronounce the word when he's teaching this halakha? Sh'adam chayav lomar kilshon rabo. Because a person must always say things exactly the way they heard it from their rabbi. So the way he heard it from his rabbi was incorrect. And because of that, Hillel forever, when he teaches this halakha, he teaches it incorrectly. Let's look at the note of the Rambam here. The Rambam has to make some sense for us. Footnote Gimel. So if you look in the column in the middle, the left side, there's a Gimel in brackets. Do you see that? Yeah? You see the Gimel in brackets?
Yeah. Shemayah.
Very good. Shemayah and Avtalyon hem rabotehem shel Shammai v'Hillel. Now this is written in Arabic, translated by Rav Kapach. Okay? Shemayah and Avtalyon were the rabbis of Shammai and Hillel. Kemo sheitba'er be'avot. Like it's been explained in Avot. Or will be explained in Avot. V'hayu alehem hashalom gerim. And they, peace be upon them, were gerim. V'nishara b'lshonam alagut hagoim. That they, because Hebrew was not their first language, when they would pronounce Hebrew, they pronounced it with a little bit of an accent that was left over from their non-Jewish days. V'hayu omrim b'mkom melohin melahin. Instead of saying melohin, they would say milahin. That's according to the Rambam. According to others, the difference is hin and in, hey and aleph, or maybe some say ahin and ahin. They had a hard time saying the chet, and because of that, that made a problem for them when they pronounced. V'haya Hillel omer kach milahin kimo sheshama mihem, and therefore Hillel was particular to always repeat the halakha exactly the way he heard it from his rabbis, even though he was imitating their accent, which was mispronounced. Because that's the way he learned halakha from his rabbis. V'hu amro, and he's the one who said, next page, in the middle column, shechayav adam lomar kishon rabo, that a person must say things in the way of their teacher. This is a fascinating halakha. Now, I'm not here to discuss now imitating people, and is imitation the best form of flattery, or is it not? I'm not here to do that. Rather, what I am here to show you is that the Rambam, somewhere else in his Mishneh, clarifies that he believes, are Shemayah and Avtalyon descendants of Gerim, or are they Gerim themselves? What are they themselves are Gerim. Because of that, they still have an accent left over from when they didn't know Hebrew. Yes? Kapach is pointing us to a very valuable source here. This is a very valuable source. Now he points us somewhere else too. So look at the next page that I've quoted for you. You know what? Let's leave this source for just a moment, okay? Wait on this. Back in the footnote of Rav Kapach, in the original, in the Rambam, on page Lamed. So go back to your red book, the Rambam, and he continues. Ure'eh Yoma Ayin Aleph Amud Bet. Look at the Talmud Yoma, page 71b. Yetun b'nei Amamya v'lo zera Amamya. Look at the story there, and you'll see mashma shavotehem goyim, that it is apparent from the Gemara that their fathers were non-Jews. I want to read this Gemara with you. Can we do that? So I attached, not in the PDF, but at the bottom of the Zoom invitation, I attached a link to Masechet Yoma. Masechet Yoma. It says 71b. Do you see that? Chevra on Zoom, you know where to find the Yoma 71b? It's attached to the bottom of your Zoom invitation in the Google Classroom.
Yes, thank you.
Okay? V'yom tov haya oseh le'ohavav. The Mishnah says that somebody would make a Yom Tov for those who loved him. Who is this referring to? Is my father in the call? Who used to make a Yom Tov?
Yes.
Abba, mi haya ve'oseh Yom Tov le'ohavav? Mi haya ben adam hazeh? When he came out of the Mikdash, the Kohen Gadol, when he would come out of the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy of Holies, he would make for himself a celebration for all of his family.
He survived entering the church.
The words of the Mishnah, if you want to look on page 70b, so 70a, Ayin Amud Aleph, the Mishnah says, all of the work of the Kohen Gadol, we read this in our community on Yom Kippurim. We read this section here. Obviously rewritten a little bit. About what he wore, this clothes, the gold clothes, the white clothes, and he switched clothes, and all of that happens. And then what would happen? The Mishnah ends, U'melavin oto ad beto. Oh, sorry, let's read it. V'kidesh yadav v'raglav u'pashat. And he washed his hands and his feet, and he took off his clothing, the Kohen clothing. Hiviu lo bigdei atzmo v'lavash. And he wore his regular clothing, meaning his own clothing, and he wore them. By the way, from here maybe an allusion to the Spanish Portugese minhag, that the rabbi wears special clothing, but only wears them in the Beit HaKnesset. This ritual garb that they wear. Once they leave the Beit HaKnesset, they look like any other person. Only in the Beit HaKnesset, like the Kohen Gadol, almost. U'melavin oto ad beto, and they escort him, the whole nation of Israel, they escort the Kohen Gadol to his home. V'yom tov haya oseh lo havav b'sha'a sheyatza b'shalom min ha'mikodesh. And when he came out alive from the Holy of Holies, he made a celebration for his whole family, because he survived. So this is exactly what the Gemara is going to comment on this story. Now we know already that in this generation, the Kohanim are corrupt Chashmonaim. They are Maccabees gone wrong. We know that they're not righteous people. We know that the people no longer have faith in this type of leadership. Let me read to you the Gemara now on page 71b. Okay, 71b. It's the link that I sent you. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. Maaseh beKohen Gadol echad. There's a story about one Kohen Gadol. Sheyatza mibet hamikdash. He left the Bet hamikdash. V'havu az lekule alma batre. The whole Jewish people were escorting him. Why? They're used to this. It doesn't make a difference. He's a crooked Kohen Gadol. But at the end of the day, they're used to fulfilling this halakha to escort the Kohen Gadol home. Kivan dechazyonhu l'Shmayah and Avtalyon. Once the people noticed out of the corner of their eye, they saw that Shemayah and Avtalyon. What were Shemayah and Avtalyon doing? Most likely, they were also escorting the Kohen Gadol, even though they knew he was. They were showing, they were humble people. They weren't gaftanim. Once the people saw Shemayah and Avtalyon, shavkuhu lididei v'az le'batar Shemayah v'Avtalyon. The people were so overcome with excitement to see Shemayah and Avtalyon out and about that they all abandoned the Kohen Gadol and they started following Shemayah and Avtalyon home. They decided to escort Shemayah and Avtalyon home. So here's a Kohen Gadol. This is his day, this is his party, this is his special moment, and everybody abandons the Kohen Gadol, to go walk these two rabbis, the two Chachamim that are there. Now we already know there's a struggle between the Chachamim and the Kohanim. We already know yesterday that Shemayah is the one who told his students, stay away from the government. We're not involved anymore. We're pulling back. That was yesterday's shiur. By the way, there is a Sephardic minhag, an old Sephardic minhag, that on Motzei Yom Kippurim, everybody would go to the house of the chief rabbi, of all the Chachamim in the city, to go get brachot, like you would go to the house of the Kohen Gadol, and they would make celebrations. And there's a world that had such beautiful Jewish minhagim, and today they replace it with, let's go get pizza and Motzei Yom Kippurim, let's go get bagels and cream cheese, let's run for... You have here ice cream, right? Shemayah and Avtalyon, they're following them. Lasof, what happened at the end? Atu Shemayah and Avtalyon liftu remine the Kohen Gadol. Shemayah and Avtalyon decided, listen, it's not nice. Everyone's coming with us. Let's at least go say goodbye to the Kohen Gadol. Let's go. L'shem shalom lechem. Shavua tov. So they go over to the Kohen Gadol. Amar lehem, the Kohen sees them approaching and he welcomes them. Yetun b'nei amamin l'shalom. Come you children of Goyim, come to me. That's what he says to them. The Kohen Gadol says to Shemayah and Avtalyon, come to me you children of Goyim. Rashi, look what Rashi says. If you click on that in Safari, you'll get Rashi. Rashi says that they came, litol reshut mimeno v'lifrosh l'tzad bedan. They were coming to him in order to ask his permission to leave his presence and go home. And what does he return to them? Leshon Gnaihu, he's denigrating them. Lefi sheba'u mibnei banav shel Sancheriv, because they are descendants of Sancheriv. And he is clearly upset that everybody left him to go to them, so he's mocking them. Amule, and they respond to the Kohen Gadol. Yetun b'nei amamin l'shalom de'avdin uvda de'aron. Yes, let us children of Goyim come in peace, who act like Aharon HaKohen. Rashi says, Rodfei Shalom. We act like Aharon HaKohen because we are lovers of peace. We do everything for peace. We're even coming to you for peace. V'lo yeteh bar Aharon l'shalom, d'lo avid of Aharon. And let not you, the son of Aharon, come in peace because you don't act like your father Aharon. See the answer? He says, come here, you children of non-Jews. And he says, yeah, exactly. We're children of non-Jews who act like your forefather Aharon. And look at you. Let's not let you come, you child of Aharon who doesn't act like Aharon. In Hebrew we say, tshuva menatzachat. This is a perfect answer back to him. But you find already Shemayah and Avtalyon, even though they're the leaders of the Jewish people, and the people, the whole population follows them and wants them, that still there's a struggle. among the Kohanim, that everyone is leaving them to go after these two rabbis who are Gerim. It bothers them very much. Rabbi Yosef Kapach uses this, so look back in your Mishneh Torah. Rabbi Yosef Kapach uses this Talmud to teach you that Shemayah and Avtalyon, it doesn't say that they are descendants of Goyim, rather it says they are Bnei Amamim, they are the sons of the Goyim. Mashma shavotehem Goyim. You see from the story that even the Gemara understood that their fathers were non-Jews. Ureod Pirush HaMishnah Eduyot Perikei Mishnah Vav. So if you want to see another source, says Rav Kapach, I recommend you looking at Eduyot, chapter 5, Mishnah 6. Let's do that. I photocopied it for you. It's the last 2 pages of your PDF. Yes, of the Shemayah and Avtalyon PDF. I'm sorry that I'm jumping around with you so much. I want you to see these sources in sight. So if you look in the PDF, I'm assuming this is page 5 or 6, probably 6 of your PDF, and it should say at the bottom, Reish Yud Gimel. Guys, I'm sorry that I don't know what page of the PDF you're on. My iPad has died forever, and I'm left with Elchanan's iPad, but it doesn't have all the features that... 6? Thank you. So here's what the Mishnah says. A story. Akavyah, you see Mishnah Vav in the middle of the page Reish Yud Gimel. Akavyah Ben Mehalalel. Where do you know the name Akavyah Ben Mehalalel?
From Pirkei Avot.
Pirkei Avot. What does he say in Pirkei Avot?
מסתכל בשלושה דברים, דע מאין באת, אתה הולך, לפני מי אתה עתיד ליתן דין וחשבון.
The famous Mishnah, Akavyah Ben Mehalalel says, thank you, Rabbanit, where do you come from? Remember where you are going and who you are going to give judgment in front of. And then he repeats himself, where are you coming from? From the putrid drop. And where are you going? To a place of worms. Remember this, who are you giving judgment in front of? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the King of the universe. This Mishnah is a very sobering Mishnah. In the Jerusalem tradition, at a levaya, at a funeral, we say this Mishnah over and over and over again when we escort a body from the place where we eulogize him or her until we bury them. This Mishnah is repeated maybe 7 times. They stop, they say the Mishnah, again, everyone says Allah, and they stop again. And the purpose is not to denigrate them, to make us do teshuvah. That we should remember that all of us are going to end up here, and why are we living the life that we're living if it's not going to bring us to a better place?
What is the testimony in Jerusalem?
It could be that it's in other places, but I'm talking at least here in San Diego, all the minhagim, at least the Sephardim. I can't tell you about Ashkenazim, I'm not familiar. All of the minhagim of the Sephardim, good minhagim, that were not good, they're a sad occasion. A funeral is a sad occasion. But all of the things we used to do, we don't do them anymore. We have these very shallow funerals. The closest in my life I ever got to doing a real levaya was by my uncle, Yitzchak Daniel. There, I knew that he would want us to do as much as we could, like what he would have in Eretz Yisrael. It was a lot. If you were there, it was a very long time. It took a long time. I wouldn't exaggerate if I told you that a real Sephardic levaya could take you 3 or 4 hours. It's something that there are things that need to be done, words that need to be said, tefillot that need to be recited, tehillim that have to be. It's not for right now. We don't do. Today we're lucky we get 15 minutes of somebody knowing what they're doing, and the rest is...
I guess we got it quick because of COVID also.
We didn't because the sun was setting. And some rabbis needed to pray mincha. Akavyah Ben Mehalalel. He'id arba'a devarim. He testified to 4 things. Amulo, they told him, Akavyah, chizor b'cha b'arba'a devarim שהיית אומר, ונעשך אב בית דין לישראל. Akavyah, it seems that he disagreed with the Chachamim in 4 instances. And the Chachamim came to him and said, Akavyah, you are worthy in this generation of being the Av Beit Adin for the Jewish people. Take back your 4 stances in halakha, give in to the mainstream, and we will make you the chief rabbi. Sound familiar? So there's nothing new under the sun, correct? The world has always worked this way. He only has 4 things he disagrees with the rest of the Chachamim about. But it's enough that if he gives it up, they'll let him be the head of the Sanhedrin, or the head of the Bedin. Amar lehem, he answers them, Mutav li lehekarot shote kol yamai. I'd rather be considered a crazy person my whole life, velo leheasot sha'a echat rasha lifnei hamakom, instead of being evil in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu for one moment. I would rather you guys think that I'm not mainstream, you guys think that I'm crazy, you guys think I don't know halakha, instead of one time, for one moment, being evil in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu by following your opinion. This is a man with a strength. Shelo yomud, that nobody should say, Bishvil Serara chazar bo, that Akavyah Ben Mehalalel compromised on his integrity because he wanted a position of authority. You hear this? Akavyah Ben Mehalalel is being offered the rabbinic job of a lifetime. All you have to do is stop saying the 4 things you've been saying. And he says, no, because then I'll be following you, I'll be wicked in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and people will say about me that for this position of authority, I compromised on my integrity, and I won't do that. This is the part that gets difficult. Hu haya metameh. Okay, this is already, let's find the example we want to deal with. Look in the last 2 lines. Hu haya omer. You see Hu haya omer? Hu haya omer. En mashkin lo tagioret velo shifcha meshucheret. He said that when it came to the halachot of sotah, we don't give the sotah water not to a woman who converts to Judaism, and not to a shifcha meshucheret, not to a maidservant who has now been freed. The Chachamim omrim, but Chachamim say mashkin. That no, we do give her waters of sotah to drink. The halachic logic behind this, already it's beyond the scope of today's conversation. Let's look at the top of the next page. Amrulo, they told him, Maaseh b'churkamit shifcha meshucheret shayta b'Yerushalayim. Let's skip this term, churkamit. We'll look at it later at a different time. There's a story about this shifcha meshucheret, this freed maidservant. What is a maidservant? A person who's a slave in Am Yisrael goes through half a Giur process, In order to be a slave in the Jewish people, they go through half of the Giur. And when they are freed, they have the opportunity to convert fully and join Am Yisrael or not. So here is the Shifcha Meshucheret, Shayta b'Yerushalayim, she was in Jerusalem, V'hishkuha Shemayah and Avtalyon. And Shemayah and Avtalyon gave her water to drink, meaning the sotah water to drink. What's the proof here? That Shemayah and Avtalyon agreed with the Chachamim or with Akavyah Ben Mehalalel? With the Chachamim. Chachamim say that you give sotah water to somebody who's a gioret. And Akavyah Ben Mehalalel says you don't. So they said, but we know a story of Shemayah and Avtalyon, these great giants, that they gave a sotah to drink. Amar lahem, they told him, he answers to the Chachamim, Dugma hishkuha. I will not explain this answer yet. Dugma hishkuha. Veniduhu. And they excommunicated Akavyah Ben Mehalalel because of his answer. Umet b'niduyav, and he died as an excommunicated person. V'saklu bedin et arono. And when Akavyah Ben Mehalalel died, the Bet Adin stoned his coffin. You thought you were getting some light reading tonight, huh? Now the Mishnah continues, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Chas v'shalom she'Akavyah tadah, she'en ezra ninelת על אדם בישראל בחומה ורת חטא כאקב בן מהללאל, ואת מי נדעו את אלעזר בן הנוד שפקפק בטהרת ידיים. This Rabbi Yehuda steps up and says it's not an accurate story. Chas v'shalom, it's not Akavyah Ben Mehalalel. This is the case of a wrong identity. There was really somebody else who was stoned his coffin, and he was mocking the Chachamim. It had nothing to do with Akavyah Ben Mehalalel. I'm not dealing with the second part of the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah has on record Akavyah Ben Mehalalel telling the Chachamim, I will never change my stances. And when they asked, but what about Shemayah and Avtalyon? He gave them such an answer that Chachamim excommunicated him. He never did teshuvah in his excommunication. He died that way. And the Bet Adin stoned his coffin before they buried him. You want to make some sense of this story? Look at the Rambam. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Rashi gives a different understanding here. What does it mean, Dugma hishkuha? They gave her to drink because they're like her. Meaning, what was his answer? Don't learn halachot from them. They have a soft spot in their heart for converts because they're converts. That's what Akavyah Ben Mehalalel said. And this denigration, both of Shemayah and Avtalyon and of Gerim, caused the Chachamim to excommunicate Akavyah Ben Mehalalel. Now here, the Rambam has a little bit of a different version of what happens. If you look on page Reish Yud Daled, in the middle column, yeah?
Can I add, to the contrary, it's not a soft spot. If anything, the Shemayah and Avtalyon, they were treating her like they would treat any other Jewish person, but ultimately she was suffering because of that treatment.
Okay, fine, that's a fair point. That's actually a fair point. Let's look here at the Rambam. If you look in the middle columns, in the right one, there's a number 53 over there. Is it a little 53? I'm reading right next to that 53. V'amar, and he said, she'en mashkin gioret u'mushucheret mei sota, that we don't give a convert the waters of sota. U'kasher hiviu lo raya b'ma she'asu Shemayah Avtalyon, and when they brought him a proof that there's a precedent, a rabbinic precedent, Shemayah and Avtalyon gave water to the sota that was mushucheret. Amar, they said, shehem lo hishkuha mei sota be'emet. He says, no, they didn't really give her sota water. Ela hiru be'eneha kidu hen mei sota, v'hem kemo mei sota. That these Chachamim had compassion on her. What do I mean compassion? Not talking compassion. They didn't want her to feel different than everybody else, and because of that, they gave her fake mei sota. They pretended like they were giving her mei sota, but it wasn't real mei sota. Upirush dugma, and when he says they dugma, davar hadome, something similar. In Hebrew, modern Hebrew, the word dugma is used as an example. So they didn't give her real mei sota, they gave her dugma mei sota, example mei sota, fake mei sota. V'lo asu ken, and they only did this ela mipnei shehi gioret v'hem gerim, because she's a convert and they're converts. V'ke'elu lo ra'u la'achika b'gal yichasam nafshi la'uma, and they had a hard time pushing her away because of this spiritual connection they had. Yes.
Is this constant bringing up of the Gior status because of the legalistic aspects of the positions that they held? I thought we're not supposed to remind Gere HaTzedek that they
Rashi writes in that Yoma that we read, the Talmud Yoma, Rashi writes that Kohen Gadol שהוניתנו הונאת דברים. That he was guilty of afflicting them with words, oppressing them with words. Damar Mar, because Mar says in Bava Metzia, page 58b, Lo tonu ish damito, the Torah says in Vayikra 25:17, you cannot oppress your fellow. Be'ona'at devarim hakadu medaber, the Torah is talking about hurting them with your words. Im haya ben gerim, and for example, if he was the child of converts, lo yomar lo zechor ma'aseh avotecha, you're not allowed to tell them, remember the things that your forefathers used to do. By the way, from here I wish to correct a misnomer in the Orthodox community. There is no prohibition in knowing that someone is a convert to Judaism. There's nothing wrong with telling this is a person, he's a Gere HaTzedek. This is a title of honor in the Jewish community. In the Jewish community of today, people feel bad being Gerim, or they like to make Gerim feel bad. That's a problem with the Jewish community, not a problem with Gerim. When a person gets an aliyah to the Torah, my name is Yonatan ben Avraham Avinu. I wish I had that title. No offense to my father who's on the call. I wish my father was Avraham Avinu. My father is a great man, but he would also agree he's not Avraham Avinu. Today, what do people do? No, call me Ben Avraham, don't say Avinu. Why? Because you live in an evil Jewish community that persecutes Gerim. Because of that, nobody wants to identify as Gerim. But the Torah never tells us, don't tell a person that they're a Ger. If that was the truth, then we wouldn't call Shemayah and Avtalyon Gere HaTzedek. The prohibition is to use their status of Gere HaTzedek to hurt them. Oh, remember, you didn't used to eat kosher once upon a time? But the same halakha applies to somebody who did teshuvah in their life. You know that they once upon a time didn't eat kasher. Now you remind them, although you look at you think you're so holy, do you remember what you did last year? That's the lo tonu. But to mention that a person is a Gere HaTzedek, if that's a crime, then I do it all the time. How many times do I give somebody Mishneh Berach, Ben Avraham Avinu? How many times do we make kiddush here in the Beit HaKnesset on the anniversary of somebody who became a Gere HaTzedek? That's not a crime. That's the contrary. That's fixing a problem. We're fixing the problem. We're showing people this is a reason to celebrate in the Jewish community. The problem is to use that status to hurt somebody. And that's exactly what's happening to Shemayah and Avtalyon over and over and over again. It's the Kohen Gadol, it's Akavyah Ben Mehalalel. Their position is being challenged precisely because of who they were, not who they are. But that, yeah?
Well, took it as being proud of being someone who wasn't observant and then became observant.
Of course. That's how it should be. But that's how it should be. A person should say, you know what? I'm a person who, I know all the things that you only dream about. I did them, and I'm still here today. I'm here today because I'm that person. It's a testament to their willpower, to their strength. I want to end off, though, something about Akavyah Ben Mehalalel. So God forbid we don't walk away from here thinking he was a bad person. He was concerned about whether you could learn something from this story. I want to talk to you about the end of Akavyah Ben Mehalalel's life, and with that we'll end this today. Look at the same Mishnah that I have, the same Mishnah that you were looking at before. About Akavyah Ben Mehalalel. On page Reish Yud Daled. No, in the PDF that's attached, Shemayah and Avtalyon. It should say at the bottom, Reish Yud Daled. Yeah? I'm in Mishnah Zayin. You see Mishnah Zayin? Mishnah Zayin is 4 lines up in the top of the page. Okay? 1 line above that. B'sha'at mitato amar livno. Now, Akavyah Ben Mehalalel is now on his deathbed, and he's still in Nidui. Amar livno, he tells his son, Bni, my son, chazor becha ba'arba'at devarim sha'iti omer. My son, abandon these 4 halachic stances that I taught you. Before he dies, he tells his son, those 4 things that I was willing to lose everything over, you now give them up. Why? Amar lo, ata lama lo, chazarta becha. If you're telling me to give it up, why didn't you give it up? Amar lo, he says, Ani shamati mipi hamerubin. I heard it from many Chachamim. Vehem shamu mipi hamerubin. And they also heard it from many Chachamim. Ani amati b'shmuati, vehen amedu b'shmuatan. I stood with my tradition, and they stood with their tradition. Aval ata, but you, shamata mipi hayechid u'mipi hamerubin. You heard this halachic opinion from me as an individual, and from them as a majority. Mutav lehaniach divrei hayechid u'le'choz b'divrei hamerubin, page 7. It's better that you should give up what you learned from me as an individual and accept what they taught as a majority.
It seems to indicate a real oral transmission.
A very oral transmission. The Rambam struggles with this here at the bottom. Why would you give up something you know is true just because of the masses? And the Rambam explains the logic for if we were learning this Mishnah at a different time. It's the word of advice at the end that he gives his son that I find the most telling. Because at the end of the day, Akavyah Ben Mehalalel was a real person, genuine. Amarlo, his son tells him, Abba, father, pekod alay lechaverecha. Do me a favor, father. Before you pass from this world, put in a good word for me with your friends. Say something good to them. Maybe they'll hire me. Maybe they'll put me in the Bet Adin. Maybe they'll give me a yeshiva. Say something good to your friends from me. Amarlo, he tells me, Eni mefaked, I won't do it. I won't do it. I will not put in a good word for you. You know, it must be very difficult to be in a relationship with Akavyah Ben Mehalalel. He's a person not stubborn, but with integrity. Amarlo, he tells him, Shem avla matzata bi? Did you find something wrong with me? Amarlo lav. His father said, no, I didn't find anything wrong with you. Rather, ma'asecha yikarvucha u'ma'asecha yirachakucha. Remember, my son, that your actions will bring you close, and your actions will draw you away. Your actions will determine how people like you or don't like you. Your actions will determine where you make it in life or where you don't make it in life. My word is going to pervert the truth. I'm not going to put in a good word. You have to put in the work. If you put in the work, you'll make it to where I made it. And if you're not willing to put in the work, I'm not willing to sacrifice my integrity on my deathbed and ask people to do me a favor for you. This teaching of Akavyah Ben Mehalalel is profound. It's very important. It's important because it shows you exactly the life story of Shemayah and Avtalyon. Call me what you want. Say about me what you want. Tell me that I'm a Ben Gerim. Tell me that I'm the one who does this or one who does that, or I have sympathy with a sota. Whatever you want to say about me, say. But if the push comes to shove, who led Am Yisrael? Who gave the oral transmission to Am Yisrael? Shemayah and Avtalyon, Gere HaTzedek. They were the righteous converts because they were the most worthy of this position. You know why? Not because their father put in a good word. Because you can never say that Shemayah and Avtalyon made it to the top because their parents put in a good word for them, because their parents were idol worshippers. You know how they made it to the top? Their actions. Their actions is what made them the leaders of the Jewish people. Nothing else. They don't have any fancy yichus. They're not from the tribe of this one or the tribe of that one. They don't have connections. They are Jews that worked every day and every night to lead Am Yisrael. And the Torah that you have, and that I have, and that we all have, that Torah belongs to them. Because if it wasn't for Shemayah and Avtalyon, there would be a gap in our chain. There would be no Hillel and Shammai because they wouldn't have rabbis to have taught them. And you can only imagine where it would be had the oral transmission broken. But instead, two people, not born in Am Yisrael, joined Am Yisrael. They saw the truth. They made the decision to lead Am Yisrael forward. I forgot to tell you, I was going to end the shiur here. I forgot to tell you the rest of what Harav Kapach said, and I don't mean to put a damper on the end of the shiur. But I want to just end off with this last teaching because we started it. Chabal, we don't read it. The Harav Kapach, now back, last time we're going to open up a book. In the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, 38 at the bottom. Harav Kapach writes in the last two lines on page Lamed Chet, in the last two lines of the left column. It says, V'shamati mizkenim, I heard from the elders. Ki ma she'uchsheru litmanot nasi v'abedin, that which they became the nasi and the head of the bedin, ki motehem Yehudiyot, that the mother of Shemayah and Avtalyon, their mothers were Jewish women, shehimiru datam, that converted out of the Jewish faith because of the influence of the non-Jews in the world. On the top of page Lamed Tet in this right column, v'naseu legoyim, and they married non-Jewish men, v'hem noldu begoyut v'gadlu begoyut, that they were raised as non-Jews. They grew up as non-Jews. Their mothers were Jewish, they didn't know. They knew their mothers were good non-Jewish ladies. V'kasher gadlu, when they grew up, nidgeiru beli sheyedu motzai imotehem. This Rav Kapach tells you an oral tradition he has in his Bet HaMidrash, that they were raised without knowing, they decided to convert without knowing that their mothers were Jewish. They reached the truth of the Torah on their own. They had no idea that they were really Jewish. And because of this, they were called righteous converts, because they came to Judaism on their own. And only later did they discover that their mothers were Jewish. How many times has someone told me they converted to Judaism only on their parents' deathbed? They told them, you know, you were really Jewish. Our family survived the Inquisition. I only told you now. I didn't want to ruin your life. And only now you find out. But I converted to Judaism 30 years ago. I didn't want to tell you. And because of that, they were able to be members of the Bedin, the Nesiut. V'nishar shmam Gerim kifi matzavam k'shechnasu leyadut. And they remained, they kept this title of Gerim because that's how they entered the Jewish people. That's how they returned home. Now, it's a beautiful story. It doesn't have a source. Rav Kapach is a good source, but it doesn't have a source that I can point to. Nonetheless, it just adds a little bit of more drama. So these are children, according to Rav Kapach's reading, these are children of Jewish mothers who left their faith, converted to another religion, married non-Jewish men, raised their children as the perfect idol worshippers, and those children did teshuvah and came back to Am Yisrael and led them. The point is just as strong as it was before. Your life does not depend on how you were raised and who raised you, or who your parents were. Your life depends on what you're going to do with it. And if you do something great with it, great. And if you don't, so you'll be the loser at the end of the day. Maybe more than you being the loser, Am Yisrael will lose. I cannot tell you how many good people I know. Good people that I know. That at some point in time, they gave up on Judaism. It's a crazy religion. I can't handle these rabbis. And I always tell them, if you leave, you're not the only one who's going to lose. I'm going to lose. We're going to lose. Because we're going to lose people who understand the problems of Judaism and want to fix it. If you walk out the door, you're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting the rest of Am Yisrael. And I know some great Talmidei Chachamim who had a point in their life, high school, college, wherever it was, that they almost shut the door on Judaism. But they say, no, I'm not leaving. I'm not going to give them the satisfaction of leaving. I'm staying and I'm going to make it better. And those type of Chachamim, Shemayah and Avtalyon, they show us that every single one of us, we don't have an excuse. Who's going to change the Jewish people? You're going to change the Jewish people. It's a follow-up of last night. You're going to change the Jewish people. How are you going to do it? What connections do you have? You don't need connections. Your actions, they speak louder than words. Your actions will determine the future of yourself and of all of Jewish history. B'ezrat Hashem. All right, Rabotai, thank you for learning with me tonight.